Okay. All right. Welcome to our training session of April 17th, 2014. We have a couple of topics we want to cover today, and I'm going to cover them in this order, which is redirect module and managing links when you're doing a partial migration, um, using features and best practices for Workbench. If other questions come up during the training, we can, I would be happy to answer them. But I think we also want to make sure we get through each of these main topics as well. So let's do our best to think about things that maybe could wait to the end of the training. um, so um, so when I've talked to John a couple of times about um, this redirect module training, and I know it's for one site where they want to do a partial migration. Basically, let me see if I have this correct in my mind. They're going to move some of the pages onto the new Drupal site, but keep their existing, perhaps content site running at the same time. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, I think I want a full understanding of the redirect module regardless, but
Okay.
it's essentially a large site that they can't move everything all at once.
So does that mean they'll have different domain names essentially, right? They'll have,
Yeah, so it's the Duluth site that we're talking about, and so
great,
they've
thank you.
already decided that they're going to go with Duluth, and they already have D dot, so they'll have the two domains.
Okay, great. So let's, I think there are a couple of things to think about when you're dealing with links in general, and one is to think about where they're located, and then there's the redirect module, which can help manage relative paths. So typically, you can use the menu system to hold internal and external links. So that's something that should work for them as far as kind of providing the similar navigation on the two sites, but switching between the two of them if certain pages are still on the old site versus the new site. You can just change your menu items as needed. Um, I think the other concern will be links that are in the main content area, and those would likely have to be changed manually. Um, but we can support redirecting old paths to new pages and items like that with the redirect module. So let's go over to configuration and we'll scroll down here. URL redirects under configuration is what we're talking about when we say redirect module, right? So we can go in here and there are a couple of key pages. This list tab basically shows you the redirects that you have in existence already. I've already created one here as an example. So for instance, you might have a scenario where the current path is something like about-Rochester, but on the new site, they're going to the new content and its path will be something like about us, right? So over here, I've actually already created one of those pages just so we can see it. So I have an About Us page, and I can use the redirect module to say, hey, when someone goes to the old About-Rochester, I actually want to redirect them to this specific node. And the way I do that is by basically putting in the old path and then pointing it to the new node in Drupal. So you can do this from this configuration page where you can click Add Redirect. So we could add another one. Let's say we could say something like about UMNR, right? Is the old one. And we say it should still go to About Us. So I don't have to remember the node ID here. I can just type in the path that I set up. And now I have two of them. So, and if I want to test them, I can just test them directly here. So I'm going to right click on this and open it in a new tab. And we'll see that it actually redirects up here. Hopefully you can all see that. And now I'm on the About Us page, right? So those are the basics. When you add a redirect, I was really quick there. Let me just go back in. Um, so it's my old path, my new path. Advanced options is just setting the HTTP status code. It's almost always going to be 301. So we just have it default to that. Fix 404 pages is a lovely tab that points out where 404 errors have occurred, basically that the page doesn't exist. In this case, we're seeing some JPEG files aren't available. So it's nice to know if someone clicked on an old path, it would show up here in this list, and you can add a redirect for it. And basically that takes you to the same form. So right now the list of things that have 404 errors aren't really all that relevant, but that would be something that you would want to be checking as the new site is launched. You come over here to fix 404 pages and say, okay, what URL paths are people hitting that's causing a 404 error to happen? Let me fix that with a redirect. And then on our settings tab, this checkbox is the automatically create redirects when URL aliases are changed. So what that means is if I go to About Us and I decide I want to change it to from about-us, which is right down here. No, sorry, aliases. Sorry, I forgot. um, I forgot we were using passlug. So if I want to change this from about-us to say just about, I can do that. I bet. I'll make sure this stays published.
Well, we'll find out. Well, and you know who would know for sure if he gets problems with it? Ruth.
And then let's go back over here to our redirects.
Sweet.
This should create an additional URL redirect.
Yeah.
Right. So now we have About Us is an old path, which now points to /about, or basically the same node. So that's a nice feature to have. It is it's something that when we do migration work, if Ryan DeBaker is on the call now, he'll want to know this. When you're running a content migration, it's good to uncheck this box during that migration because we already handle redirects as a part of the migration process, and you can end up with too many redirects, essentially. And then there's retain query string through redirect, which basically says if you have an old path that had a question mark, A equals apples, etc. Can everybody read that? Or is it readable? Is it a little small?
I can read it.
Okay. So that way, even the redirect module can even manage situations where Drupal would just have a nice path like we have up here, right? Admin config search redirect settings, but if what's nice is you can still support an older path that has the query string in it, that basically has the question mark and then a key value pairs after it. So you can manage those redirects as well. Here's where we set the default status to be used, which is 301. I would think you'd want to keep it that way. Allow redirects to be saved into page cache. I don't have this check, but I would think we would probably, this could be useful. Because what it would do is a redirect would pull from the cache essentially. So someone's already loaded that page before. It's not trying to reload it from scratch. So by default, this is unchecked. And I think once it's a checklist item for when you launch, you would check this box so that once the new site is live, you're also doing some page caching for redirects. You can also delete redirects that have not been accessed for a certain period of time. Again, we've left this at the default of never, so you can have them for as long as you'd like and just redirect them when you choose to. But it's pretty lightweight, so you can just leave them in here. I don't think they, it's not too much of a hardship on the system. So, and of course, if you do want to delete any, you can. The delete operation is right here for single item deletion. So I wonder if you are interested in setting up quite a few redirects at the same time, there is a migration class to use the migrate module to import some redirects, which would be a pretty straightforward migration class. So if you needed to do a bulk import, that is possible. But out of the box, we're not providing that migration service. Are there any, that's the general use of the URL redirects. Are there any specific questions about redirect that I could answer now?
I think I'm going to want to play with it a little bit, and I may
Okay.
have questions after I've done that.
Okay, sounds good.
I
Yeah.
don't know if this is a good question now, but we were just talking about our site yesterday, IT at UMN, and we've got really deep URLs right now that we do want to maybe change or redirect. So it seems like we could do that easily with this.
Definitely.
Okay.
So when in your new Drupal site, when you create your page, right, you can use that path slug to set your preferred path. And I've only been using simple words here, but you can use dashes and other, and dashes and forward slashes and things like that. So you can make a more complicated slug, and that way, and then you just use redirect as you create those new pages on your live site.
Okay, that's excellent. Thanks.
The other important thing to note is you can also create those URL redirects from the page you're creating. So if I needed to, I could add yet another redirect to my About page here. So it's kind of, I think what's nice is if you're creating, if you're an editor and you were creating a page and you knew the old path, you could do it here. If you're an administrator and you have a bunch of your redirects you want to create, you can do them here through the configuration.
Okay.
And then do I need to review menus at all to show how we can link to other sites or anything like that, or is that pretty straightforward for folks?
Personally, I don't think you need to. I don't know if anyone
Okay.
else on the call feels that it's necessary.
Okay, I figured most folks were up to date on that. All right. So that was redirect, and now we're going to move on to features. So there have been several questions about how to use features and when we want to make changes, configuration changes, how does that work? And so I think where I'd want to start with are some specific questions John had sent to me, and then if we have other types of features questions, I can go over them now. So I think what's important to know about features is that the concept behind it is that you could take configuration changes you make through the user interface and export it to code, essentially. It exports into PHP code, into a Drupal module that you can then enable or disable. And the idea there is it allows for easier deployment of configuration changes. So I know one of John's questions was, well, if someone wants to make a change on production and they don't have access to code, how are they going to do that? So I think the answer is you can, there are some workarounds, but essentially they would probably end up making those changes manually on production. There isn't a way for us to move features through the user interface at this point. So, you couldn't create a feature on, say, the staging site and then import it through the user interface to the production site and have those changes apply. So that's a limitation of Drupal 7 and features module. And it's kind of going against what the features module was meant to do, which is pull that configuration into code. So one possibility is that when they want to make a change, let's say they want to go to a content type and add a field or something along those lines. My recommendation would be that they copy the production database to stage and run through the steps, the changes they want to make, and do some testing and make sure that that works for them, and then repeat those on production. If there's a way that they could make the changes and then work with a developer who can export those changes back into the code, that's another option here. So when changes are made through the user interface, let me just go over here for a second. Go back to features. So the way features likes to work is that it has a set of configuration settings, right? So it knows about a content type like the general page, and it tracks what fields are on it, the settings for those fields, things like that. So when you go and look at the features through the user interface, it will check the state of that feature, and you can see it takes a little bit of time. But there's some, you can even disable a feature if you don't want to use it, that sort of thing. So you can come over here and see the state of, the state of that feature, and then decide what am I going to do with it. So if it's overridden, then I know there are changes that were made through the user interface, say to the calendar content type. So I might want to either recreate that feature or revert it. So when I click on overridden, that would give me a chance to look at this feature in more detail and then say, you know what, we don't actually really need this change to the secondary group audiences field. I can check this box and revert it. I'm not going to do that here. One of the nice things about features is that it integrates with the diff module, that's DIFF. So what that can do is actually show you the difference in the code that would be exported when you export this feature. If I click recreate, I can wait for a minute, and I can do a lot of additional. This is really what it looks like when you're creating a feature for the first time. So you're going in, there are all of these components over here. It can get pretty complicated. There's a search filter to allow you to find particular components that you would like to change. So if I knew I changed a field, I could look for, let's see, that one was about secondary audience or something like that. So let's see if I can find that guy. Oh, okay, so I have these options here that maybe I'd like to pull in. Here's the field instance I was looking for, secondary groups, audiences. Yep, that's a new field. I want to pull that into this feature, let's say. So I can check this box, and then downloading the feature is the thing that actually generates the code. So the way that looks is you can click download. And basically it's going to generate the PHP code and it downloads it as a file. It's a tar file, which means, right, it's kind of it's a packed file with additional files within it. Let's see if I can show you what that looks like. So right now I'm looking at the innards of the feature itself. So again, for those of you who've looked at modules, contributor otherwise, you can see it comes with the same, very similar looking files. So it really does behave like other contributed modules, but it's features, right? So its focus is, let me apply configuration changes um, to my site. So that's really what the essence of features is, generating this module that I can then put back into the repo and deploy those changes to dev or stage or production. Let me just check my notes, make sure what I've
So you
covered
just
here.
import it as if it was another module then.
Yeah, so typically what we do is, you're right on target, John. So once I've downloaded the feature, I can put it into my sites directory, right? That's where we keep our custom features. So give me just 1 second here. What we want to do is make sure that we put this module, this feature module, in the appropriate location. So I'm just starting up my IDE here so I can give you kind of a nicer view of what the directory system looks like within sites.
While we're waiting for that, I'm curious,
Mhm.
how safe is this? So if we wanted to offer this as a feature for people who don't do coding, and we say, well, okay, you do your changes and we'll pull out the feature, they should probably do that in dev then, right? So that we can import the feature into stage to make sure it works, or is it safe
Exactly.
to do it? Okay.
Yeah, they would. So the process would look something like this. Like, okay, I want to make configuration changes. Let me copy my production database to dev, make the changes, export the feature module, and then pass that off to OIT to get it back into the repo, or to their own developer, right? So they could do that as
Yeah.
well.
Okay, so that's a little different because we've been putting people who don't do custom coding straight to stage. But if they
Or
want to do it,
stage, yeah.
but if they do it to stage, then the first time we're writing the features module would be production, though, right?
Uh, well, no, you can still test on the stage environment, right? So let's say they use the stage environment for their changes, and then they send you the feature module. And then you say, okay, well, we want to test to make sure this feature really works the way we want it to. You copy production database back down to stage and then enable the module or run an update hook. I can show you what that looks like.
Yeah, I'm
Is
hesitant
that
to do that just because then if it doesn't work, they've lost all the changes they made in stage. So yeah,
if they made other changes? Is the
yeah.
idea that some people would be working in stage and then they want to push that database to production?
Well, what I'm trying to think about is like if somebody makes changes in stage and they want to make sure the features updates. When we pull the database back down from production, they lose those changes. But if the features module doesn't work the way we expected it to, or there's a problem with it, they would lose
Mm,
those changes when we ran it in stage.
yep, yep. So you would really want to use all three environments in that
Okay.
case. Okay, so let's start from the top. So I have a UMN site here, right? And so the very top of our repository looks like this. We have Aqua Utilities, um, the doc root, which is really a symlink to this www subdirectory, and we have some other, the simple SAML config library sits up here as well, outside of the doc root. So I go into what now is Drupal core, and then within that, right, so this is our platform code, and then what sits inside of that is sites, right? So for each of our sites, default, there's a grad site, and I have a generic UMN site, right? So when I want to take my feature and then put it back into the repository, I would want to, I updated an existing module, feature module, right? So it was called UMN Groups Calendar Content Type. So what I want to do is I go into modules because it's a module. We've separated our modules from our features with these subdirectories. So I know I want to go into custom features. And then within custom features, we have common, UMN, and UMN groups. So common are features that are shared across the two installation profiles. And then UMN holds features that are specific to the standard installation profile, and UMN groups holds features that are specific to a group's installation profile. So I know I'm dealing with UMN groups, so I'm going to go in here, and then I can see the list of all of the features that are group specific. And here's my calendar. My calendar content type feature. So typically what I do is you can take that .tar file and then just unpack it directly inside of UMN groups, and we'll just overwrite as it needs to any of the files inside of the UMN groups subdirectory. If anybody needs some quick tips on using the tar command, I would be happy to help. But I'm not going to review that right now. If you created new features, let's say things that don't come with the installation profiles, because that is very likely, you could do one of two things. You can, if you know you're using UMN groups, you're welcome to put them in here. You could also create another subdirectory saying, you know, my site's features or something like that, whatever you want to call it. What's nice about the features module in Drupal is it will always recursively run through all of these directories, seeking out features and modules. Okay. John, you had also asked about making changes to Panoply and then kind of moving the database from one environment to the other. And just in case, you know, if we don't want to follow this path of actually committing changes to a site's repository, could we kind of move the production database to stage, make the changes, and then push that database back up to production? And I will say theoretically that's possible, but typically we don't recommend using that approach for making these types of changes.
Would it do you have would it be possible if you have enough time to walk through maybe trying something like so I agree that it probably isn't practical. I mean, unless they do some kind of a code freeze to do the download the database to stage, make the changes, and then re-upload.
Yep.
Could you just walk through, like, make some quick change in Panoply or anything and just walk through the process with us just so I can see how it works?
Okay, sure.
Does that make sense?
I think so. So what you're looking to see is not necessarily watching me move databases around up on Acquia, but just how do you make the change and see the change in features?
Yes, that's what I'm thinking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Let's go back to our features list and we'll find something that hasn't been changed. My training site gets used for many testing scenarios, so I've often customized the features. Let's see.
So,
yep.
so what I'm thinking about is if somebody does this and they just want to they change one site or one page, one node on a site, that wouldn't be captured with features though, right? You're
That's
talking
correct.
It's general. Okay.
So should I just show that to folks while we're getting those? So if I go to my About Us page, it's, well, features is loading, so it's taking a little bit. And I click Panelizer, or I customize this page, right? They do same things. And I make changes to the content here or to the layout. That will be only in the database. We don't, right now, Features doesn't offer a way to manage changes like, oh, I'm going to put related content above pull quote. Right, so if I make that change here, the change is specific to the About Us page, but it's only in the database. We actually looked at trying to find a way to track these changes and put them into a feature early on because we wanted to provide more demo content, like sample content for folks to see how to use Panelizer and panels. But there is no easy answer to that right now. But you can change and store changes for panels per content type and for panels everywhere, which manages changes in the header and footer. So where I make those changes, let's say I'm going to change a content type, I can click, let's say, General Page Panelizer. And then I can make changes from here if I want to change what displays on the page, or if it's a teaser, if I want to show different fields there, right? So all of these changes can be made. Let's see, we can click on content. So I can make changes here, and those would be tracked by features. So let's take a look. I selected general page without checking to see if it was overridden. Oh, perfect. Look at that. Okay, so general page is, this is our feature, UMN Groups general page content type, and it currently has a default status. So I'm going to change the structure of this page to say related content goes above pull quote. I want uploaded files above links. The rest of this looks fine. So I click save here. So this change that I've made applies to all general pages across the site. It would not affect my About Us page, which I have now customized. So anytime I change a specific node, it basically ignores general global changes over here. So I think what's, a good action plan for dealing with panels changes is prior to launch, make as many changes as you possibly can for each node type and for the header and the footer, and just really try to work through how do we want this content to be laid out, and then restrict how many changes can happen per node once the site is live, because they kind of, they're basically forking, right, from the global settings. So my settings have been updated here. I changed my general page. I'm going to go back over to features. It doesn't show me immediately. I'm going to have to reload the page, which will take a little bit. Right, we have quite a few features in use here, so it takes a little time for the features module to go through and check to see where there are differences. So that's in UMN groups. We'll just give that a minute to load itself. So you could, yep.
So I have a quick question. One thing we do in training is we demonstrate how to make a new content type.
Mm.
If people are making new content types, which I've heard from a lot of people who've attended training that they're going to want to make new content types, will they have to create a new feature for that content type to document like the basic structures or basic settings, so that in the future, if they need to make a change to that content type, they in Dev, as John was saying, in Dev would make the changes and then go find that feature. It would show override, and then they would export it, and the workflow you demonstrated.
Yes, exactly. And I think the tricky thing there will be teaching them how to create a feature. Would you like to see how that looks? It takes a little bit of time, but I can try and make a quick content type here, and so we can see how it works.
Yeah, I think I'll need to at least understand the fundamentals of it.
Yeah, because features is incredibly powerful, but as you can see, the user interface is it gets pretty complicated. So it takes a little bit of practice to make sure you exported everything you wanted to export. Okay, so just a reminder where we are. We're at structures, and this is the main features page. And now our general content type here is in the overridden state. So now I know somebody made a change, and I want
So
to export that.
so
Yeah.
so I understand Pat's question. So like this list that you have here,
Hmm.
this isn't automatically created based on content types you've done some things to make them appear in this features list.
That's correct. So
Okay.
all of the features that are available to you after, when we do an installation were built by the Palantir team. So basically, the way it works is you go through the user interface, you click through, create your content type, then you come over um, to features and you click the over here create feature tab and you start clicking through the components. So I'm gonna show that to you now if that works for everybody.
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to just so you know where I'm at. I'm going to structure and content types, and I'm gonna create a new content type for us. Let's see, what might I create here? So it could be like reports. Okay. Um, something reasonable. So I'm creating a content type. I'm calling it reports, or actually report would be preferred here. We usually use singular with content type names. I give it a nice description and I might check to see what kinds of options I want here. I'm going to keep it pretty straightforward. I'm not going to promote this to the front page, and I want to create new revisions because I want to make sure we're tracking the work that each person does when they work on a report. We do not want to display author and date information. This is something Core provides by default, but it's usually we usually track if we want to show an author or the date using Panelizer. It gives you a little more control over where things display. Date pop-up, I'm going to go with the defaults there. Menu settings, I have been doing some CBS menu migration in here, as you can see. So it defaults to the main menu. That's great. I want my reports in the main menu. Organic groups. This could be group specific. I think I will make this group content. So if I'm creating we create this group content type, right? So I would check the box group if I were creating a content type that represents a group. But when I want to put content in a group, right, assign it to a group, I check the group content box. Node is good. We don't need to worry about that. Panelizer, yes, we want to panelize. We always, the UMN base theme is relying on Panelizer being in place. So in general, and we've been following a practice of every content type can take advantage of Panelizer and that we don't use the view modes that you typically see in the Manage Display tab. So usually this is what you'd want to do. Panelize, we want the full page override. We can leave these unchecked. We don't need to worry about these other guys. Do I need a teaser for report? Maybe. Yeah, let's do that. And the rest we'll leave there. Great. Scheduler, I'm not worrying about scheduling, so I can leave those all unchecked. So I'm going to click Save and Add Fields. As Drupal thinks. So technically I wouldn't necessarily have to add fields for a new content type. They come with some fields out of the box. but I want to make sure that you know what it's like when you're going to features to find those fields. Um, our convention with building out the installation profiles is that we do not use the body field, but we actually use a separate field called field body. And we do that so so that we have more control over how the body field is used. So this body field comes from core and has a little bit of limitation. But when I create a separate long text field, that can be, we can manipulate that a little bit more. So there are lots of fields already in existence. So typically you won't need to create a new field unless it's a real new type of a data that you want to track. So let's do body, and then scroll down here. Where did my long time? Oh, there it is. There it is, field body. Great. So I'm going to add that guy. I've got my group's audience. That's great. And then we'll click save. Right, so I want to click save now so that I actually get to fully configure the body field. So enter the main report status update in this field. I can decide how many rows it has. We'll go with 3. We don't expect it to be that big. I want to use filtered text, not plain text, so that I can use a rich text editor. And I will only have one value, meaning I only have one body field. I can't have multiple bodies there, but you could change that as needed. All right, so one more thing I want to check is, well, one, I'm going to delete the old body field before I get confused. And even though, you know, I'm creating this content type, I'm deleting a field, and you're thinking, whoa, she's so nonchalant about that. But I haven't created any content yet. So when you're first creating a content type, you can add and remove fields as you need to. The one last thing I want to check, I just want to confirm that my rich text editor is set to use the UMN WYSIWYG. Okay, it is. That just makes me feel good to check that out. Perhaps I am overly concerned. So back to manage fields. Let's see, is there anything I want to add here? No, I think that's good for now. So as I was saying before, we don't use manage display once we have Panelizer enabled. So I don't really worry about this, but I'm just clicking that to say don't worry about it. And I'm going to go over to Panelizer to set the layout of my content. So we're going to check these 2 boxes so that people have control over the entire panel settings. I'm going to click full page override. Oh, that's unexpected. Let me try clearing the cache.
While you're clearing the cache run,
Yeah.
question for Pat is he has something that we had slated for future training about best practices for creating new content types. How close are we to getting what you wanted here, Pat? Or, I mean, if we're really close and there's just a couple of other questions, maybe we can just capture that now.
You know, we're kind of, well, the fact that features needs to be part of, you know, creating new content type is, you know, definitely helps that. You know, some more depth into, because we touched on it earlier. We already went over it one time, like at a pretty high level, but we didn't really get into like depth with Panelizer and some of the different settings in Panelizer, and that was kind of the straggler here. So if you know, we kind of delve into features here and we look a little closer at panels, it probably would be okay.
Okay. Great. So I realized my mistake before, which is I had checked these two boxes to allow changes, but I didn't click save. So that's why when I went over to full page override and clicked, oh man, again, why is that causing me trouble? This is really surprising. Let's figure this out. Page cannot be found.
So one question I have, real quick while
Yeah.
you're clicking around there is, it looks like we can only have a certain number of panels per content type, and I can foresee situations, especially using views in the teaser panel, where I may need to have a display of a view that needs the titles to be heading level 2s, but I need a similar display of this view where I'm going to need heading level 3s or heading level 4s, for example, something like
Mm,
that. And if I
yeah.
only have one teaser panel, I'm going to run into accessibility issues with incorrect heading levels.
Um, Here's what's interesting. You have a couple of options. One is we have another um, mode called featured, which so you could have teaser and featured. Um, and I believe you can. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Um, I think we have to check all of these boxes. I think I'm just not remembering things quickly here.
Most
So
of the content types are most of the content types that are created in the at least the organic groups install profile have teaser and featured selected, and I believe they
yeah,
have analyzer checked and the provide default panel checked, but not allow panel
but
choice.
not allow panel choice.
Yep.
Um, oh yeah, they could. I see what you're saying. That's me just clicking through quickly. So I believe we can offer, I think you can add more of these types of panels, basically types of modes. Um, but I have to be honest to say I can't remember how you go about it. So, um, but I can check that out and get back to you about it. So let me just make a note about that.
Okay, sounds good.
How to create more panels modes. Because we created the featured and teaser, and those are teaser may have been there, but featured was not. Okay, so back to our new guy report. Let's pull this in here. It's interesting to note this delete link that was there in the operations. Um, you can delete that content type right now because it's not in a feature. But once it goes into a feature, you can no longer delete them.
Okay, that's the difference. I was wondering. Okay.
Mm, okay, one more time. Let's make sure I've got everything here. Okay, sorry, I missed a checkbox. Okay, so now I'm working on my report. Typically what I want to do is actually, let's go to the layout first, because let's say I'm going to stick with having a left sidebar. So I might have, well, I can see what Panoply offers. It offers a whole bunch of things, right? But we might use, I think Brenham is the one we typically use, but you can use any layout you want.
Just
Um,
just out of
yep.
curiosity, what and you don't go
No,
into detail, but if somebody wants to add an additional layout, is that a major undertaking, or is that not even an option? Or
It's a person with development type skills can add a layout. So it does require changes to code, um, and then it can show up in one of these options here. But so far we haven't
I
really,
have a quick question.
yeah,
I just have a quick question about the builder layout after you get done here.
okay. So you could add more layouts. I remember Christina had a question about, wanting to, what was it? It was like use accordions and tabs on the same page. And I realized later, I was like, oh, you can just choose a different layout so you have more regions to work with. So, you know, that will be a typical answer when you need to do fancier layouts on a single page. You probably want to choose a different layout for that specific page.
That's actually what I was thinking about is what she was trying to do. We couldn't
Mm-hmm.
find a layout to do it. And so
Oh,
Well,
really?
we
yeah.
couldn't find one, yeah.
Meaning that there just weren't enough regions, or that the layout you were hoping for just wasn't.
We
You were,
couldn't find a layout with the regions where we wanted them was the
yeah.
case.
We could find
And this is
one that had them on the right, right, but we didn't want them. We wanted both of them in the center column.
Yeah, kind of like this one, but with two boxes here in the middle instead
Yes,
of.
exactly. And so you
It's,
couldn't use what you were just showing, where you allow people to have multiple body
yeah.
fields. Could you do that?
No,
no.
because the style plugin applies to the region, and each of these
Okay.
little boxes is a region. I think the best you could do is the brown. So you would use brown. Let's say the top one is accordion, the bottom one is tabs, and you don't have to use these bottom regions. So you just fill out your sidebars as necessary.
Yeah, that was an unusual case, but so this stuff you're showing the layouts in Panoply. That's
Hmm.
platform code, correct? So that's something that individual departments wouldn't be able to do. That's something that we would have to provide from an OIT level.
Oh, that's a good question. So to answer your first question, yes, these layouts come from Panoply, which is part of the platform. Could you create, but I would think you could create your own layout and put it in your sites repository and make it available here. It's a little bit module and a little bit of theming
So I
to set up.
mean, a college or a department could do that just for their site, and then if it was something everybody else needed, OIT could add it to this selection. Can we add ones for everybody?
You can. So that would happen in the platform code itself.
Okay.
And the layouts are it would end up in the base theme essentially.
Okay.
Okay.
And
Yeah. Yeah. My question, but departments should be able to also do this if they have somebody with the appropriate skills
that's correct. And
without
access.
affecting the overall platform.
That's right.
Okay.
Exactly. Okay.
So real quick, the
So
question I have on Builder,
yeah.
it looks like the Builder layout actually does let you, once you get past selecting it and get into the content section,
Yes.
you actually, it looks like you can actually create your own regions and size them the way you want. And my question is, can you actually use Builder to do that? And is it responsive the way the Panoply layouts are responsive?
Right. So the answer is you can use Builder as a tool to build out the layout you want, but you need to turn that into a real, a real honest to goodness layout. You don't want to rely on Builder, and this comes from the maintainers of of the module itself, that it's
Mhm.
just there as a quick and easy tool to get the layout the way you'd like it, but then it should actually go into code. That it's incredibly inefficient to use a layout that comes from the builders.
Okay, but it is,
But it's possible. So you
it's
could, for
possible.
instance, that might save some time. If I go to builders and I start building out the kind of layout that I'd like to use, and then I can I think there's a way to generate the code from that. I'm not going to run through that right now.
Mhm. But in general, we don't recommend using Builder, even though it can create a layout from scratch. There's more involved with that layout in order to get it to perform at the same level of the other layouts.
That's correct, right? So it's definitely discouraged to use Builder as the basis of a layout that's in production.
So to use Builder and then somehow use features to get it into
Yeah,
code.
exactly. Well, not features. I think it provides its own little export tool, but we can go over that. I'm just going to make a note of it.
Okay. I don't want to get too far off of
Yeah.
the topic for today's training though. Although it is amazing the little tidbits we're picking up here and there.
Well, that's why these trainings happen, because sometimes it's good to just have a chance to ask questions, and you can click around a lot in Drupal and end up eventually just your eyes glaze over. You're like, what was I trying to do? So, so I'm happy to help answer questions as best I can. Okay, so my report is going to use a standard layout. I'm going to click continue. I'm going to put this over here. Click save. This is kind of a generic thing, right? So that little box I moved was representing all three of these panes. It's just kind of generally, where do I want things? I want them all here. Okay, so what I would want to do with any content type that I'm creating, and I know that I have like secondary navigation in the sidebar, is I want to make sure I add that in. So again, this is something actually Andrea is improving in the current sprint to make sure that we always have our menu block in place. So let's see. Can't remember if it's blocks or custom blocks. It's custom blocks. All right. Menu block? No. Let's just search down. Even oh, wait. No. Maybe it's menus. Even when I when I haven't been looking at the blocks, and we have a lot of I have a lot of blocks migrated in here because I was working on that for CBS. So here's I've got a level 2 menu block. It was in menus. I should have just clicked that the first time. I'm going to click add. I'm not going to worry about overwriting the title. Just get that in place. If I want to use one of the style plugins, I go to, style, change, select one of the options here. Secondary, option 1 or option 2. So I click next. And then, I don't think I want to show, I'm going to show audience, but I want to move it below the body. And that's good for me. So I've got some settings in place. I'm not using the heading right now for this particular content type, but I could add more things up there in the header region as needed. So I click save. So now I've got a new content
So I have a
type.
real quick question about the panels that we should.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a real quick question about the panels we should put in here. It seems like under the title type drop down there, manually set title, it has little configuration there to automatically put in the title.
Mm-hmm.
Never had in the full page override panel in the organic groups install profile, never had it actually put the title in. So is it intended to put the title in without having us to put a title pane into one of the regions, or is it just we just put a title pane in one of the regions?
I would put a title pane in one of the regions, specifically for groups, because groups comes with it. Each group can have its own header. I believe what we're doing is trying to put the title of the page in the group's header specifically. So that's why it's a little more open-ended with the group's profile.
Okay,
so yeah, so let's add in the title.
So there's a difference in behavior between the UMN standard profile and the group's profile in terms of whether to add a title pane or not?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to search for title because there's so many. Node title.
Since it's a 2-hour training and we're an hour in, do people want breaks or do we want to just push through?
How's everybody doing? We could take a couple of minutes. And then when I come back, we'll work on the feature. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Great. I'll
Great, thank
just
you.
leave it like this.
Yeah, I think from our previous trainings, we need to leave we can't pause the recording or anything like that. So
Right. Okay. We'll come
good.
back and finish adding the title and then create the feature.
Okay, sounds good.
So I forget, I did training. I just want to say that so I don't forget.
Oh, yeah, I mean, there's with
I'm back. How about other folks?
I'm back.
Okay. Wait till we hear from everybody.
Is anybody or everybody back?
I'm back. I think
Okay.
Pat's back.
I know Alina just sat down. Who
Okay.
else is in the?
Who's missing?
If you're not
Speak
here,
up.
please speak up. Yep.
I'm here.
I'm here.
All right. I think
I
we've
think we're
got
good. I think we've got a quorum.
Sounds good. All right. So I was in the process of adding the node title for my report content type. So I'm going to just do that. I'm not going to override the title. I'll just let it use the title as is from when a person enters it right in the form. So I could, excuse me, I can apply whichever heading tag I'd prefer here, or even a div. We'll use an H1.
So in our content types that
Mhm.
exist, should we be selecting heading level 1? There are no other headings before when the title heading probably would show up on the page.
Yeah, typically H1 will be great. We're not setting, we're not using the H1 in the base theme. There could be a possibility for your groups that you might want to do. This is one of the reasons why it's a little more vague with groups. So let's say I have a group header and I want the title to show up in that header, and it's kind of like group name, node title, right? So I want both of those to be in H1. So that would occur somewhere else, not here. So if I wanted to show the title again in the main content, then I might go with an H2 or something like that.
Yeah, but the way things are set up by
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 default, you would,
default, when they come, we select H1 here.
yes, exactly. Yeah, we kind of follow the Drupal convention of node title is H1, and nothing else would own that.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not going to worry about CSS. I'll just leave that as is. Oh, I left a, I let it link to the node, which I didn't need. So let's do a couple things. I'm gonna drag it up to the top. That's always the scariest thing. You add a pane and it's down at the bottom and you're wondering what just happened to it. So that happens to all of us. So let me just go in here one more time and uncheck, right? It sets that check by default, but I just want it to be a plain title because I'm already going to be on the node itself. Okay, so I have title, I have field body, my group's audience I've decided to display lower in the page, and my links.
So real quick, the behavior that we would find in UMN standard for the title that automatically gets put onto the panel because we have manual set title, that title
is,
field
yeah,
up there.
it's used there. Yeah.
Yeah, where do we define the heading level for that?
That would be in panels everywhere. So
Okay. And I know where that is. So
okay, great. Glad I can say that then. So you would go in there and you'll find a node title pane is set there, probably in another type of header region, specifically for panels everywhere settings. Okay, so I've got a content type. It has a body field on it. I have some panelizer settings, and I'm going to create my feature. So I'm going to menu structure, features, and I'm going to wait a minute. And this is for groups because that's the installation I have here. So one of the things I think I want to point out here is a little bit about how we structure our features. So for a content type feature, it typically has the content type and any views that go with it and its panelizer settings. We have UMN groups field definitions, which is, this is a little bit about how core works and how fields work in Drupal. So there's kind of a base definition for every field, and then when that field is applied to a content type, it has a field instance. So we store the bases separately from the instance usage, which is per content type. It's a little tricky, but just what you want to remember is if you created a new field, completely new field, not just adding an existing field to a content type, you would also want to update your field definitions.
Okay, and that's one thing we do in training is we basically make an event content type and do a time date field that wasn't
Mm.
part of an existing field. So
Yeah, so to save yourself trouble, the reason we do this is because features can become confused when the base definition is with the instance. When a field is used on more than one content type, you can end up with some conflicts when that base definition is in each feature. So we separate out those base definitions, so they're always unique and they're only in that one feature. And then the instances are, have their own set of configuration, which will be stored with the content type feature.
so when you so if you are making a new content type and you want to have a new field that isn't part of any other content type, this is like the first time you've run across it, but you want to have that field available for other content types because you want to be efficient.
Mm-hmm.
How do you build a field outside of a content type?
Well, you can build it the way you typically do, right? Under content types, you would add the new field and you would just use the user interface the way you typically do. Then when you come over to features, what you'd want to do is say, recreate my group field definitions and add the field base for your new field. So I'm not going to go into that right now, but I can show you. Maybe we can see it here a little bit.
That's okay.
It's
I just I know the high level workflow now.
Yeah, exactly. So you'd click recreate, you would find that component and make sure it's the base, not the instance, right? And add that to this feature. Then I would go to create my new content type feature, like I'm going to do now.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. So again, I was talking about bases and instances. So this is where if I were in that field definitions feature, I would go in and say, oh, I'm going to add in these new bases to my field definition. But we're not going to worry about that right now. These are showing up because I was doing some testing with CBS code. So, but what we're here to do is find our new content type. And so I'm going to try and do my best to follow the naming convention we have. And I am pretty terrible at following the patterns without looking at them. So, so I'm going to just go over here for a minute and pull up the list of features again. But I'm pretty sure it's something like UMN groups, and this will be report content type. And so I can see the machine name here, UMN groups report content type. Great. And I can even confirm that. I'm going to switch over to my IDE for a minute. UMN groups whatever content type. Okay, great. So I'm following that same convention. This can be incredibly helpful when you're actually trying to look at the features in your code repository. So it's really important to try and track the naming convention. Provide a report content type for status updates. I can choose the package, which is referring to these vertical tabs here. So I want to use UMN groups features because this is for my groups. So, and again, if I were making something custom for my site, I could make a new package. I could call it my site. You can call it whatever you want. And then it will show up. But in this case, we're going to follow our standard of UMN groups. Let's see, can I find it?
So just typing the new value in under package would automatically create the new package for you.
That's correct. So I started typing out UMN groups. It finds me the existing package. Yay, I don't have to worry about that. You can put in a version number. We typically haven't been changing version numbers for our features. It's something you have to manage manually, but it can be very useful if you have a standard you want to use, which is every time I make a change to a feature, I increase the sequential number over here, right? And if I make a major change, I would go from 1.0 to something else, 2.0 or something like that. So you can use any versioning naming convention you'd like to use, but typically we just put in the standard 7x 1.0. Now I come over here and I choose the components I want to put in my feature. Content menu links. There's a lot of those. I think, let me just check on these. Oh, those are for Devel. All right, we're not going to worry about those. So here's my content type report. But even, you know, even when I'm not sure, I can kind of just click through any of these and just read through them and say, oh yeah, that's something I need. So when I clicked report, features went ahead and found all the dependencies I would need, right? So it captures that I need the UMN field definitions, which is where my base definition is. It even captured the fact that it knows I added field body and that there's a reference field to the group. Menu links, again, is probably Devel. Yeah, so I don't have to worry about that. I have field bases I'm not worrying about. I didn't create a new field base. Field instances, I'm just going to check to see if there's anything else they might have missed there. No, there's, you know, these are node blog post, node general page, a user OG group field. I'm not going to worry about those.
So real quick, when you clicked on content types, how come report is the only one that showed up?
Because, good question, the other content types are already managed by other features.
Okay, so it's intelligent enough to know that.
It is intelligent enough to know that. So that is a wonderful and terrible thing at the same time, because sometimes you're thinking, oh, I want to group these features differently.
But you've already got the
But you've already got them in a feature. So in order to, if you wanted to shift where configuration, how it's stored in the features, you basically have to disable the features that you have in place, and then those components become available again. So it's a little bit of a scary endeavor, but possible. All right. I'm not going to worry about I don't need to add in any menus. It's really about content types. Meta tag settings, sometimes I'll just check to see if there's anything I need to add in here. We track, I think meta tag has its own feature. Let's just see if I'm right about that. Media metadata. Well, it could be that we should put the meta tag configuration with this content type. Let's go back. So we can make sure node report is available. And when I do that, again, it just added meta tag as a dependency. So you can do things like that. Like, for instance, if I had added a taxonomy field, you know, that would become, you would see that as a field instance, and it would be available as meta tag. And remember, meta tag those are the tags that are in the markup itself for identifying what kind of content you have. OG permissions, in this case, I would not worry about putting the OG permissions for my content type with that content type feature. I would probably put all of the OG permissions in one feature. We actually, when groups installs, those permissions aren't set. It's pretty tight. We actually want the group owner to go in and say who can add what type of content to my group, and who can edit it, right? So these are available components right now because we haven't pulled them into a feature. All right. Then I get to Panelizer. Default, and you're wondering, what is that? But what I do really want here is I pay attention to node : report to know that that's my new content type. So I'm getting my Panelizer changes. I would also check through permissions. Well, you know, I don't think we set any specific permissions for this content type, so that's something that I've missed here. So when you're creating that content type, you would also want to go look at each role and determine whether they can add this content, edit the content, or delete the content. So I haven't done that here, which it makes me a bad site builder. In fact, we can go back and do that, but I'm just going to skip that right now so we can get through building the feature. So a strong arm has managed to get all of strong arm, just to back up for a second, is a module that tracks variables that aren't really tied in with content type configuration, but are still important variables that we would want to keep with our content type. So there are lots of variables in Drupal, and you can pull them into features as you see fit. Right? You could even be caching, checking, you know, caching variables, all sorts of things can be put into a feature, so they're set by default. I just wanted to check to see if there's anything I wanted, right? Like I think in general, I want all my panelizer configuration for my content type with my content type feature. So I'm going to check these guys. When I check them, they kind of disappear a little bit, but they're reappearing down here. So it's okay. Report default, allowed types. Great. Anything else? No, that's it. Okay. I know I don't have to worry about taxonomy. Text formats are tracked in its own feature, so I'm not going to worry about that. I didn't create any views, but presumably you would. It's rare. Maybe general page is one content type where we don't have a view for it. But anytime I want to have a listing of content, and I would see with reports you would want that, you would create a view specifically for reports and then tack it on in here as part of your feature. Workbench workflows are managed separately, so I'm not going to worry about that, and WYSIWYG profiles are already set. So I have all that I want for my feature, and just like when we were recreating, I click download feature to generate my feature module code. So I'm clicking that now. And then again, we can just kind of take a quick look at what that generates.
So that generated the download code, but did that also add that feature to this particular instance of the site?
No, it did not. So this is what makes features what it is, right? So I now have on my desktop, right, I've got my new reports feature, but it doesn't really exist in features mind until it's in the code base. So until I take my feature and put it in, you know, where are my sites, my site directory, modules, custom features, UMN groups, and I drop it in here, the features module itself won't see it. They won't know that this really exists. So it is the tricky part about creating your feature for the first time. But that's why it's like create that feature, download it, and then get it into the repository as soon as possible, and then you have it available to enable and use in any environment.
So when somebody makes a content type, they create this, then do they need the GitHub repository then to then tell OIT, go to this GitHub repository, grab this, put it into our development environment and so on?
Yes, so if they have access to if the site owner has access to their Git repository, then they can commit that code in, you know, with a git commit, git add, git commit, and then push it up to their repository on UMN's GitHub server, and then it can be deployed with layer cake to dev or staging or production. Does that make sense?
Yep. So basically, they'll need the GitHub, their own GitHub repository, and then once they put it in the GitHub repository, that's when they contact OIT.
Right.
To have them move it over to.
Yeah, it'll be a little different, Pat, because everyone has a GitHub repository, whether they know it or not. And so if it's something that we're managing, we'll have to decide internally how we're going to support this, because we have made a commitment that some to sites that if they don't want to manage code, they won't have to. And so this may become, I don't know if Steve's still listening, but this has maybe become more of a support issue that we have to discuss. So
Okay. I just need to know how to sell it, you know, or how to explain it to others. So,
yeah, it certainly, if they have their own repository, then they would do it. But if they don't think they have a repository, or they don't know that they have one, then that's a case where we'll probably still need to support this. So it's just more
okay.
reason to hire more support people, I guess.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, so it might be that once they've created this this tar file, that they're creating a support ticket or something like that. I don't know. So that's one possibility, and then just attaching it and saying we'd like to put this feature into place. Okay, so that's creating a feature. Are there other features questions? While I check my notes to make sure I covered all things
So let's say I
features.
create this feature, I create a content type, and then I create the feature in dev, and I want to test it out in stage.
Mm-hmm.
So then in stage, we import the feature, we go to the modules page, we turn it on. At that point, does it automatically create the content type, or do we need to do something at that point to make the changes appear?
All you need to do is enable the module, and it will create the content type, views. It sets all of that configuration for you. So that's our benefit to using features. That it basically runs through all of those clicks that we just did manually again and again for you in any environment. The
It'll do
other
that the first time, but like if you make changes, because that was a concern that somebody brought to us, is if we're using features and they make changes, they don't want their changes overridden.
Their features in general doesn't override other people's changes that were made through the user interface.
Okay,
So
that's where they'd have to go and click revert if they wanted to go back then.
right,
Okay.
exactly. Otherwise, their customizations will stay in place, the ones that are in the database. And then the one other thing I think I want to show folks here is when you create a feature, if let's say you're creating a new feature that will be available by like the platform is offering a new feature, right? So we discover this report content type is the best thing ever, and we want to offer it to everyone. So what you would want to do is add in an update hook, which is probably something you've heard me say before, which would enable the feature the first time or update an existing feature. Or revert an existing feature. So this is something that site owners with developers might use, the update hook, as well as OIT when making changes to the platform itself. So let me just remind everybody where I am. I'm in sites. I'm in a generic UMN site setup, and I've clicked on modules and then custom, and then we have a module in here called UMN features updates, and this is basically where we go. Palantir team has been going to create update hooks, and those occur in the install file. And let's just, so you can see what the code's pretty straightforward. You can, let's see if there's any that enable features here. I think most of the time we were reverting existing features. So we use revert when we're actually taking a feature that we've changed in the code and saying we want to apply this to an existing site. So there's a function that features provides called features revert, and you pass in an array of feature components that you'd like to revert back to the state that's in the code. So revert is always talking about things that had been changed in the user interface not including things like adding a field, right? So if I revert a feature, it wouldn't remove a field that was added by someone, but it might revert to the default configuration settings for a field. So if you had changed what rich text editor is available for the body field, and then you ran features revert, it might revert back to our standard UMN WYSIWYG rich text editor. So that's the kind of reverting that would occur to to answer John's questions with a little more detail. So typically what we do is each time we get ready to do a code release, we create an update hook. So an update hook is something that has, there are a couple of important things. It has the name of the function, this keyword update, and then a sequential number where 700 is representing Drupal 7 and 8 is just I'm incrementing. So 7 represents Drupal, and then I have an incremental number here on the right. So if you want to learn more about Drupal's API, api.drupal.org is your friend, and you can look up that function by typing in hook update. There's hook update and hook update n. So that n is representing like the 7008 in my example there. So I can select this function, and Drupal's API gives me a lot of details about how these functions work, down to specifying what these numbers should represent. So update hooks are incredibly useful when you need to push out changes across across environments or across sites. Okay, I'm gonna, unless there are other features questions, I'd like to switch over to Workbench, if that's okay. I'll take that as a yes. So let's go back over here. So I know the topic was best practices for Workbench, and I would like to confirm that what we wanted to talk about was really about Workbench moderation. Is that correct? Or should I actually go through the my Workbench UI?
Well, mostly I want to kind of know who should really be in the My Workbench tab and some like of the efficiencies there, but also like how do I update the workflow, because Workbench controls the overall workflow, right, of draft, needs revision, publish, that sort of thing.
That's right. So there's Workbench, which is really just a suite of modules that I'll use the word Workbench in them, and they work together. So the main Workbench module provides the user interface we see here. It provides the My Content tab and the Create Content. We have another Workbench module called Workbench Media, which provides this file list tab. And what's important to know is that these are all views. So if you want to alter what Workbench does and how it appears, you may do so by editing the view. So we provide what we think are some reasonable defaults, but we expect people who implement Workbench to alter these views to suit their own needs. So when you turn on Workbench Moderation, another Workbench module, then we get the My Drafts and the Needs Reviews, which essentially is going to show me content that's in the state of draft and content that's in the needs review state. Right, so there's this user interface, and in general, I think anyone who has access to create and edit content would want My Content, Create Content, File List. File List is helpful to see what files already exist on the site and to search for them. It's a little bit, it's a bigger space to see the images. It gets a little tight when you're in the modal. So it's kind of nice to look at them through the file list tab. And then folks who manage the publication of content would definitely want the needs review, and everybody should have My Drafts, because I'm not sure if there's any content contributor or editor in the world that doesn't want to have the concept of draft. And that's the one big thing that workbench moderation gives us. It's this idea of a forward revision, basically creating a revision that in the future we will publish, but right now we want to keep it to ourselves. So that's what workbench moderation does, providing that draft concept, that forward revision, and then workbench moderation also offers the idea of the editorial workflow. So our default workflow is we have draft, needs review, and published states, and we manage that in the configuration section. So actually, let me get there from another
I
tab.
had some people bring up, and I wasn't 100% sure about the answer about the draft state. If you have moved a node into the publish state, and then you want to make some major revisions to that node, can you make some revisions to the node, move it into a draft state, and have the previous published state stay live while the the current draft state stays saved for another day's worth of revisions before you actually publish another iteration?
Yes, that's exactly the point of draft. So you create your page, you publish it, and what it's really about is tracking revisions, right? So we talk about the node's state, but it's really about what is the state of this revision of the node I'm viewing. So when you set some, let me when you're creating the content and it's already published, then you would select, say, start to edit it. And as soon as you set it to draft, it's not setting draft for the entire node, it's setting the draft state for that particular revision. That's why when you create the content type, you want to make sure that a new revision is created with every save.
Sounds good.
Cool. So, and revisions,
Can
again,
Can I just clarify? I just want to make sure, because somebody asked me this, and since I haven't been in to Workbench at all, I didn't know the answer. But it sounds like this is what they wanted to do. Is so I could have a draft, but every time I could leave it in draft. Every time I hit save, though, there's going to be a new version that is tracked.
That's correct.
Okay. Good.
Yes, and it just keeps tracking each revision, and as long as you're setting the state to draft each time that new revision gets created, it's set to draft. Your published revision stays published. Nothing happens to it. It just stays there until you feel like, okay, we've made all the changes, we have all the images, it's been reviewed, we can publish this now.
Okay.
So you can have many revisions while one of those revisions stays published and you continue to make changes behind the scenes.
Excellent, thanks.
Okay, so over in, I've clicked on configuration, and down in the bottom corner here we have workflow, and there are 4 options down here. We have states, events, we have stateflow history entities, which I'm not going to cover today, but I can. What it allows you to do, just a quick review, is it even says it here, is adding fields to the stateflow history entity, which basically means with each revision I could be tracking certain field values, and typically this is used for, say, I want to set a node to needs review and I want a particular person to review it. I could add a user field to the stateflow history entity, and that will track, basically, Joe is the guy that reviews this particular node. So we don't do that by default. It's usually more than most folks need. Basically, there aren't so many contributors and editors that folks can't just talk to one another and say, hey, this page is ready for you to look at, which is typically a better approach. But the way we get started with Workbench is using workflows, right? So states and events, which seem the same, but they are different. So the state is, as you would expect, it's the state of the revision. It's draft or needs review or published or archived or whatever you'd like it to be. You can create as many states as you'd like. I recommend sticking with the basics we have. It's usually plenty. published is the special state that basically says this revision will now be considered the published revision. And for those of you who are a little bit nerdy, basically what it does is it takes the version ID and sticks it into the node table. So, so the published revision is basically there's a revision ID, and the node table in Drupal tracks node ID and revision ID. So when I say something is published, it actually updates the node table to say your revision is, the one that you should look at now is, 1, 2, 3. So, so states show us are really the concept of what state is this content in, or this revision. Events are what event really is managing is I want to go from one state to another. That is an event, right? So typically when we set it up, we have states and events matching in name. And when you're creating content, let's just go there quickly. So in our published vertical tab, we say choose an action. That's an event, right? So we're actually saying, hey, go from draft to needs review, right? That's what this, so that's what events are. When you want to change what displays here, I add an event. But for each event, I need to know that I'm going from what state I'm going to. So it's a little bit confusing, but it allows for a lot of flexibility as needed. So let me go back to where we were here. Okay. So let's just take a look at how we have this set up now. We have, oh, actually, I have something fun to show you. So when you see a new installation, you always have this default workflow that includes draft, needs review, published. It applies to all content types, and we set which user roles have access with the state. So if I click edit, oh, I can't, that's not what I wanted. Let me go back up to workflow. So I set access control for the states, and right now everything is wide open. Everyone can have draft, everyone can have needs review, but published is available only for certain user roles. So I click edit, and access is the important word that we want to track here. And we created an access handler that says if someone has the user role of editor, senior editor, or administrator, they can see the published event and state. So that means contributors by default do not have access to published. So let's leave that there. And so this default workflow that we have, right, it's generic, it's applying across all of our content types, and I thought it might be interesting to show you what you would want to do if, let's say, you want a different workflow for a different type of content. And I've done that here with news. So basically what I can even show you with a new one. The way it works is, we'll just go through the news quickly, and then if you want me to, I can create one from scratch too. So the workflow will apply that we're creating here is providing a different set of events and states available for news content type, right? So in this one, I'm just going to have draft and published because in this scenario, we don't need needs review. News can just go out as soon as it's ready. Great. So I don't check needs review in the states section. In events, it then actually removes needs review as an available event, right? So that's how those two things tie together. Context is usually something, I've never used context-specific settings with Workbench workflow, but it's something that's available via ctools, because it's ctools that's really providing this user interface. So you can leave that as is. We don't need to add any relationships. And then we go back to access. And access is where we can control how workbench moderation affects users or node types or all sorts of things. So in this case, I added an access handler called node type, and I said this should apply to anything that is of type news. So what does that mean? It means when I go to general page, I see draft needs review and published. But when I go back, I'm going to just do that through the browser bar there. So let's say, what was it? It was news, right? So I click on news, click on my publishing options. Now I only have draft and published. So that's a typical scenario I see where it's certain content really needs to be thoroughly reviewed before it's published, but other content, it's fine. As soon as the owner wants to publish it, they can do so. So that's a typical scenario. It's usually what user roles have access to which states, and which states or events, I should say, which events are available when I actually create content. Are there any questions about that before I move on? So the important thing I want to note here is back in our workflow, in our workbench workflows, I mean. So I have two workflows here, and you may have noticed that we have wait with each workflow, and it is important to know to set your weights appropriately. This user interface, unlike blocks, which provides a listing of the blocks by weight, we can actually sort things by a variety of data. So if I want to see what is affecting my content first, then I would sort by weight. So what does this mean? This means when I created my news workflow, I made sure it was a lighter weight than my default so that it applies to the news content type. If the weight were, let's say I set the weight to 3, then we would still see the default workflow for news. So it's kind of like the default workflow is our standard. It's the common denominator. When I need to make special workflows for certain content types or other types of scenarios, I would give them a lighter weight so that they apply first. It's a typical scenario for how panels, ctools, Page Manager, they all work in that similar style. Does that make sense? Should I walk through creating one of these like a new
Yep, it's kind of like reverse CSS.
Yeah,
I just think it's
exactly.
kind of like reverse CSS.
You got it. So
I think we're starting to run out of time, so I would suggest that we maybe save the if there's like the walking through the workflows maybe for creating a workflow if we need to for another time.
That's fine with me. The only the last thing I'll say about Workbench and its configuration for Workbench moderation, anytime I make changes to a workflow or to states or events, I need to clear the cache. So after I created my news workflow, I cleared the cache before I checked to see that it worked. So that's the one thing. ctools caches everything. So you'll always clear the cache after you're done making changes.
And how does this affect features as well?
So this would be my new workflow would not be in a feature yet, and I would put it in a feature at this point because I'd want to protect that configuration work I just did. So I would create a new feature. The workbench, the default workflow, is a part of the platform code, so it's in its own feature. So you would create a new feature and pull this ctools workflow into this is my site-specific editorial workflow feature. We could go over that in a future training if you'd like.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, John, do you have other questions you want to tackle before we finish up?
Well, I have questions unrelated to the training that I was kind of hoping to address. Uh, so specifically, we have a consultant that's working for for a department that had started their website. And this is what Christina brought up this morning. They started their website before ours was available, and they are wondering if they can somehow import their database without doing an install on our with our environment. I'm not sure how that would work, but I wanted to check with you.
So they already have their own set of
Yeah, let me see if I can find it.
modules.
So it sounds like I know you mentioned that all sites will deliver via features. Is there any way we can import our database into Acquia Dev site using backup migrate underscore migrate,
Hmm.
uploading the database through the dev site Drupal's UI, and then they can use features for any future changes they push out. Uh, um, does that does that question make sense? And is it practical for them to do this? I'm a
So,
little scared of it.
so here, uh, I'm trying to think through what that process would look like. So it depends a little bit about what modules they've used and where they've been storing them. Um, my guess is what they what would probably be better is that they featureize what they have and go through one of the installation profiles and then enable their features to apply on top. Um, because I think what happens is if they just throw their database in there, then I don't know that that would work with the platform code
Yeah, that's my concern as well.
because the
Okay.
platform code itself includes some features and contrib modules um, that their database might think should be in another directory or location. Um, Sometimes you can fix things like that using the registry rebuild drush command. So it may be possible, but I hesitate at saying that that's a good idea.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it might be worthwhile to find out what kinds of changes they've been making and then discuss it in more detail, just
Okay.
to see how they would bring those changes in.
I know we have a meeting at noon, so
Oh.
Steve's IMing me that can't we discuss this later? So,
Gee,
uh,
Steve.
yeah.
um, okay, so should we are any last questions? We have just a couple minutes, or are we ready to call it a day for this training session?
I think my brain is kind of fried.
Okay,
So,
yeah, I that sounds great. I'm glad I was able to give you a lot of information.
yeah.
And you know what I'll do? I tracked a couple of training topics that we might want to cover in future trainings, so I'll put that in the spreadsheet so we can prioritize them for future training session. And I'm really glad I have a chance to sit with you and just talk through some of these scenarios and to help you figure out what can work well for the university and for OIT for managing all the sites. So
I
thanks.
may have zoned out. So you said you were going to continue to update the spreadsheet that we have for the training. Is that what you said?
Yes, because
Okay.
I have three topics that we didn't cover in detail today, which was how to create additional panel view modes, um, using panels builders to create a layout, and how you can export that into code. And also, we didn't complete walking through adding a new workbench workflow, but it's pretty straightforward, and the most important part is just making sure you recognize your weight. So we could cover that in a future training if you'd like.
Yeah. We also completely missed the cron discussion as well,
Oh,
which is
I'm
fine. That
sorry.
can wait.
Okay, Kron.
Okay.
All right, for next time, Kron.
All right. Thanks.
All right, thanks everybody.
All right. Tom, do you need
Thanks.
to do anything to save the recording, or?